Greece and Rome are the original Mediterranean basin. To my mind, the most exciting scholarship in classics today, again, adopts the questions, the audience, and the style of the opponent and counterpunches relentlessly. I would argue that in the first panel this morning, you heard some of that very style, that very approach to the classic, very interdisciplinary, very, very exciting and elegant work. To the argument that classics was a racist field of study, we countered with criticism that demonstrated classics as being as basic to Black American identity, as one example, as anything else. Our first poet, Phyllis Wheatley, is a classicist. The great American orator, Frederick Douglass, reads Cicero and Socrates from the Columbian Orator and adopted their styles. Ralph Ellison and Toni Morrison wrote American Odysseys as novels with their deep allusions to Homer and Virgil, as I argue in Ulysses in Black. The phenomenon of classical learning and what it might bring is global. This is just a couple of books that point to what's going on in classics now. There are studies that reshape how we view the ancient world, like those of Paige Dubois, and books that change our sense of the relationship between Greece and Rome and India, the Caribbean, if you look at Emily Greenwood's Afro-Greeks, and soon Latin America. There's going to be a 2012 panel at the American Philological Association on the performance of Greek drama in Latin America. So again, the future of the classics will be one of crisis and one of opportunity, as Professor Halloran indicated and argues, similar to its past. So earlier this year, Howard University's classics department, and John Kirby and I talked about this, no one's mentioned this, we have to mention this. Howard University's classics department was absorbed by a broader suite of humanities offerings earlier this year, just a couple of weeks ago. This is the last historically Black institution to have an independent classics department. For classicists, this is grievous, and it reflects nationwide trends. Going on 2 years ago, Michigan State University closed its doors, the doors of its classics program, as the university faced 20% cuts over the course of 5 years. You've heard about the State University of New York in Albany. Larger institutions with deeper endowments would never dream of cutting their programs, we think. But globally, even schools as prestigious as Oxford University have put classics in conversations about cuts, public institutions. The UK education system was at one point last summer facing potential 80% cuts in public funding, and we know that the tuition increased threefold under the current moderate government. Despite the crisis, I would argue that we still need classics to think with, both to understand our long-standing traditions and as the basis for innovation. An example of what I mean here is my own work on Aristotle and August Wilson. And we go here, which shows me that I need to understand deeply what Aristotle means by spectacle in order to grapple with Wilson's notion that Black theater is more theatrical than other traditions. When Aristotle says suke homutos tragedias, when he says that the story is the soul, is the suke of tragedy, what does he mean? Where does he place muthos in relation to opsis or to spectacle? What does Wilson mean by making opsis the suke? August Wilson says that his contention, if you look at this slide, with Aristotle is that when you look at Black theater, he says, you have Black nationalism, the blues, the Black aesthetics. So when you see Black theater, Wilson says, some of it is not based on Aristotle, and I think this is good. A deep reading of Wilson's interviews shows me he comes up with this notion of the spectacle character, which is an idea that we don't have time to get into here. But my point here is that if I'm going to understand what August Wilson is doing in drama that's restaged on Broadway just this past year, Denzel Washington played a key character in one of August Wilson's plays on Broadway last summer. If I'm going to study August Wilson and understand what he means by a spectacle character, I need to understand Aristotle deeply, and not just in a superficial translation, but to understand what Aristotle means when he talks about the suke of tragedy. Where does he put opsis, a spectacle? Where does he put muthos, and so forth? As another example, a deep understanding of classics brings us to Orpheus as a symbol to penetrate Afro-descent identity in Brazil. an identity that is claimed by over 100 million people, or half the population of Brazil. This, of course, from the film Black Orpheus in 1959. Now, some would argue that what I'm talking about is not classics per se, but classics light. And we've heard the term classics light already today, or a subfield of classics that we might call classical reception studies. I would argue, as I have throughout my career, that as part of our future, we need to rethink our categories. I was always struck by how we talk to each other, the questions we ask each other. One of the first questions that you often get when you enter a classic circle is, are you a Hellenist? Are you a Latinist? Interestingly, that did not happen today. This is not the way people at the new Miami University speak. And it's not the way that the colleagues on the panel speak. When we talk, it seems as though we've all thrown off those categories to some extent. So I deliberately chose to write my dissertation on Seneca for my PhD to avoid this kind of choice, right? My argument then was, okay, so if I work on Seneca, if I want to understand his Medea, I've got to go back to Euripides. So you can't tell me to choose. You can't make me be a Hellenist or a Latinist. I'm going to do both, and I continue to do both. So a scholar in African American studies who writes on theater theory and reads Aristotle in Greek is a classicist, no? Or is at least someone with whom classicists should be in dialogue. On the other side, the Academy needs a home for scholars who spend their time working in Greek and Latin. Such scholars, as we've heard, provide expertise to people across disciplines, historians, political scientists, anthropologists, and so forth. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. So, far be it from me to say that what's old is new, but in the future, at least within the American Academy, we face perennial challenges. It should at least be somewhat comforting to know that we've been here before, or at least in a similar position, and we've gotten through it.